I've seen a lot of heart-stopping moments, but these, straight up insane. Just imagine sitting in one of these planes, ready for takeoff, right before everything goes wrong. From exploding engines, falling tires, and crazy bird strikes.
What's right?
Fasten your seatbelts, folks. I'm about to show you some of the most disastrous takeoff failures ever that are guaranteed to leave you speechless. You never really know what to expect when you're flying with Edelweiss. Everything seems to be going perfectly right before the Airbus A320 ends up skidding out of nowhere. I'm not sure what went wrong here, though. APU failure? Malfunctioning rudder? I don't know, but this could have ended really bad. Get ready for a bumpy ride. We have ourselves another Edelweiss, but it's the A340-300 this time around. Yikes! Last I heard, planes aren't supposed to do that. And in case you're wondering why this happened, my guess is it might have been because of the wind. But who knows? Could have been an eager pilot as well. What do you think? There's so much going on in this clip. As soon as the jet leaves the carrier, both pilots know something is up. It's an engine failure. But they're not about to give up so easily. They first drop a fuel tank to shed some weight, but the jet still isn't climbing, and that's when they decide to hit the good old red button. Both pilots are ejected out to safety, while the jet goes crashing into the water. Trying to take off after a helicopter taxis over the runway. Ever heard of wake turbulence, bud? You might not see it yet, but there's a Cessna 120 that's about to come crashing down, all because of some deadly wake turbulence. And while you watch the crazy incident, let me quickly explain. In simple words, wake turbulence is invisible airwaves created by a helicopter's air blades. And this Cessna 120 just got a first-hand taste of how strong they can be. Do you know the #1 rule they teach pilots? Your aircraft can stall at any speed or altitude, and this Beechcraft Queen Air is about to get a real-time reminder of just that. Word is, the engine blew out right after takeoff, causing the plane to stall before going crashing down into a residential neighborhood. This incident might not be all wild and dangerous like the ones we just saw, but trust me, I bet you've never seen something like this. Skidding off a runway, blowing an engine, all that sounds much more believable. But crashing into a light pole? That has to be the most embarrassing fail ever. And here's a crazy fact. Did you know it took the safety crew 3 whole days to clear this craft for takeoff? Yep. The impact might have not been that serious, but even a tiny collision like this can lead to some serious malfunctions. I wonder if the pilots got suspended or something though. How do you even miss that? Failed takeoff? Well, not really. Let's just say this gorgeous Boeing 747 is about to make a real mess. It's lined up for takeoff, and right as it's about to kiss the tarmac goodbye, it destroys the terrain, literally blowing huge chunks of grass and dirt in the air. But here's the crazy part. This takeoff could have ended in disaster if a chunk of dirt or grass got sucked into one of the engines. There's no way the 747 would have been able to abort the takeoff. Now, there's no real fire at the airport. All these trucks are actually rehearsing a pre-planned emergency drill. But want to know what they didn't expect? An actual plane on the runway. Watch as the LATAM Airlines plane rips through a fire truck and bursts into flames. I'm not sure whether this is true, but I did hear something about an ATC sleeping on the job while this happened. I bet it sucks, going from everybody watching me show off my skills to everybody watching me destroy my airplane in just 3 seconds. This pilot decided to put on a show for spectators right after taking off, and while he might have not seen it coming, I can assure you, everyone else did. The airplane will always find the ground, with or without your help. As beautiful as aviation may be, it can also be really distressing. And this incident is the perfect example of just how dangerous flying is. This Jeju airplane apparently had a landing gear failure right before takeoff, causing it to skid down the runway. With no way for it to slow down, it ends up overrunning the runway, crashing straight into the wall. Not exactly a plane, but still an absolutely horrifying takeoff. And I don't know if you'll agree with me, but I find helicopters much scarier than airplanes. Those sharp blades spin around thousands of times per minute. What a nightmare. I'll give you the good news first. No one got hurt. The bad news: both pilots lost their jobs. If you look closely, you'll see how the helicopter tips over at the last moment, with its rotor blades disintegrating as they smack the concrete. Must have been a terrifying moment for all the crew on the ground. This one's going to make your anxiety shoot through the roof. It's a beautiful evening at the Nice airport as this Rada Airlines IL-62 prepares for takeoff. It's speeding down the runway and will take off any second now. I think now would be a good time. No, that was crazy. The pilot literally used every inch of that runway. I'm not going to lie. For a second, I thought they were about to drive to their destination. Taking off during a storm? Definitely not the best thing to do. And while this could have ended as a fail, I gotta say, the pilot really showed some finesse here. But yeah, it's a tough one nonetheless, as we see the plane barely escape a tail strike as it takes off sideways. Oh, and on a side note, what in the world is up with that runway? I had no idea there were airports with bumpy runways. Thank God there was no one on board this airplane. You can see it coming in hot from the distance as it gathers speed for a routine takeoff. But right when it's about to take off, something goes wrong as it loses control and skids off the runway. I'm not sure what went wrong here. It could have something to do with the wheels, but trust me when I tell you this, those pilots are lucky to be alive. But judging from how the fire engines were on the scene in no time, the pilots probably knew this was about to happen. Oh, and is this what happens when we select express shipping?
Whoa! Whoa, 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 whoa! Load engine! Oh! Oh!
See all that rubber flying off? This 737 just lost a tire. Just imagine being on this plane and hearing a loud burst coming from underneath the aircraft. Must be horrifying. And credit to the pilot for quickly taking it off the runway and parking it, but it looks like the troubles are just starting. You can see fire trucks approaching fast as the landing gear goes up in flames. I'm thinking how different things would have been if the pilots didn't have enough runway to react this quickly. So, here's what happens when you don't have enough runway. Watch as the A320 suffers a critical failure as we see flames shoot out of one of the engines. With no time to stop, there's nothing else the pilots can do other than take off. As a passenger, you have to realize how frightening it must be being in the air with one of the engines not working. And as scary as it looks, it's actually quite common, with the standard procedure being to circle around and land the craft. I never really knew what they meant by planes being most vulnerable during and right after takeoff until I watched this footage. We can see a Russian Aeroflot plane slide into the frame, completely engulfed in flames. Believe it or not, the jet actually had a successful takeoff, but was in the air for less than a minute after being forced to make an emergency landing. And because of all the unignited heavy fuel still in the tanks, the plane went up in flames after sticking a hard landing. Also, I'm not sure if you guys noticed or not, but what's with some of the passengers stopping to grab their luggage? This is one of those moments you'd never believe if it wasn't for the footage. This 67 Lancair is clearly struggling to take off, and with not a lot of tarmac left, the pilot decides to abort. Is that a highway I see ahead? It would be a shame if the plane hit a car. Never mind, told you wouldn't have believed it if it weren't for the footage. Why did your flight get delayed? Well, let's just say the pilots were busy playing Tokyo Drift on the runway. This is what usually happens when you have wet tarmac and snow. I bet the ground staff is about to get slammed for not doing their job properly. The St. Bart's Airport is notorious for incidents like these. The short runway paired with heavy winds makes it one of the most dangerous airports in the world. And this is what usually happens when a pilot ends up miscalculating things. Now, to be fair, the pilot did manage to get the plane off the ground, but I'm guessing the wind forced the plane back onto the runway and straight to the beach. The 747 Dreamliner, ladies and gentlemen, an engineering marvel. It's the beast of the aviation world. Flying this thing is a dream come true for many pilots out there, but trust me, it's not as easy as it looks, especially when something like this happens. The pilot sticks the takeoff, but this is more about bad luck than failure. If you look closely, you'll see one of the wheels fall right off the gear. Damn, I really wish we got to see the aftermath to see how the pilots landed this thing. Here's some footage on how to destroy a perfectly functional Boeing 727. This failed takeoff happened in Colombia after the pilot failed to lift the aircraft in time. But what really went wrong here? From the looks of it, that's a cargo plane, and it's possible it may have been overloaded. But then again, there seems to be no crew, no control tower, or anything of that sort. So it might have been a dirt runway as well that led to this happening. The aftermath is crazy, as we can see black smoke cloud the sky after the plane makes a hard crash landing. I'm no expert, but this could have easily been avoided. Speed clearly isn't the issue, and if you look at the flaps, you'll notice how they're not all the way down either. But it's a crazy scene nevertheless, as we see the pilot somehow trying to lift this thing off the ground until the very last moment. It happened back in August 2024 in Khost, Afghanistan, with the Boeing 734 taking off for a brief moment before coming right back down. Judging from the damage, I don't think this plane will ever fly again. It's not just the big planes that struggle taking off. Sometimes it can happen to smaller ones as well, like this private jet here that came in zooming straight into another jet. It happened after the left wheel broke off during takeoff. There were 2 pilots and several guests on board, and while there were no casualties, a lot of people sustained injuries. Alright, so no scary crash or explosion here. Just an oblivious pilot who has absolutely no awareness. You can see an A330 approaching from far behind as the C-5M Galaxy sits on the runway. Any time now, buddy. I'd love to hear the conversation between the pilot and control. But anyway, the C-5 is way too slow in taking off, causing the A330 to take an abrupt turn and come around for another attempt. This normally doesn't happen, since commercial airports are rarely used for machines like the C-5. Again, no drama here. Wait, never mind. It's Ryanair that alone is enough drama. Everything looks normal as this Boeing 737 gets ready to take off. Or not. I have no idea why pilots do this. The back wheels rose from the tarmac with just a couple of more inches left. I think this usually happens when bigger jets are forced to use smaller runways to take off. I mean, let's not forget that the 737 isn't exactly a small plane and needs a decent-sized runway to become airborne. Close call, but well executed nevertheless. Nothing better than a window seat, am I right? You get the best views, and it's a plus if you're seated right beside the engine as well. You get to see the very part that powers the aircraft. But at the same, you're also exposed to all the horrors of flying. Like a bird strike, you can see several birds go straight through the engine, right as the plane is about to take off. And the pilots know they're in way too deep now to abort the takeoff. It's a long circle around as the pilots finally land the plane. That too, with a loaded fuel tank. Impressive. Here's another one, folks. This time around, we have the Thomson Fly 757 in its beautiful blue livery. But just as the plane is taking off, there's a bird at the wrong place, at the wrong time. It gets shredded in the engine. But unlike the strike we just saw earlier, this one is bad. The engine is actually spitting out flames. Now, these planes are built in a way that they can easily fly on just one engine, but it's not really advised, especially when you're in landing distance. This is a first. We've seen just about everything so far. But how about a pilot who forgets to hit the throttle? Don't believe me? Just see for yourself. The nose is pointed upward as the plane tries to take off, and I'm guessing that's when the pilot realizes he needs to hit the gas. Thankfully, he does it just in time for the plane to take off, but who even forgets something like that? Isn't that the very basics of flying? I wouldn't exactly call this a takeoff fail, to be honest. In fact, I don't even think it's a fail. If you ask me, this is a blessing in disguise. What better way to find out you have a blown engine while starting up the plane? And while the pilots probably feel good about this, I'm not so sure about the passengers. They're gonna hate hearing that delay announcement. What a beautiful day for plane spotting. The sky is clear, and we have ourselves a Boeing 767 lined up for takeoff. It would be a shame if something were to go wrong. Well, you already know something is about to go south. As soon as the B-767 is in the air, we can see its right engine blow, with a cloud of black smoke blowing out. It almost appears as if the pilot is struggling to keep the plane up. And an engine failure as soon as you're in the air is never good. You have so much fuel in the tanks that they come around, and landing is just super hard to stick. But yeah, the crew's ability to remain so calm with one of the engines on fire is just crazy. You're about to see a horror crash, ladies and gentlemen. This happened in Tokyo as two planes collided on the runway in the middle of the night. A Japan Airlines plane was taxiing the runway when a Coast Guard plane came in hot, crashing straight into the commercial airliner. But how does something like this even happen? Especially when there's a huge passenger plane right on the runway. So, what really happened? Well, folks, you're not going to believe this. The Coast Guard's transponder was switched off. Yep, my guy is about to land and literally has no communication with the control tower. Smart. I bet you've never seen anything like this. This dramatic crash happened in Toronto as a Delta passenger jet flipped upside down as soon as it touched the tarmac. It's the most unexpected crash ever because the physics just don't make any sense. How does a plane landing on its wheels end up flipping over? And the worst part is how the plane literally went up in flames right after the impact. Fortunately, everyone on board the aircraft made it out with minor injuries. We've seen some crazy moments, but how about a pilot literally breaking a plane in half? Yep, you heard that right. Watch as this pilot brings down his plane in style, snapping the frame in half. Here, have a closer look. You can see how the frame has this massive tear in the body. Imagine having to explain how that happened. Notice anything unusual about this plane? No? And that's a pretty nice looking landing as well. So, what are we exactly looking at here? The landing gear, it's missing the front wheel, and it becomes obvious as soon as it kisses the tarmac. I'm not going to lie, I had to watch this a couple of times to figure out what just happened. I thought the front wheel snapped off or something, but after seeing how the emergency vehicles rushed onto the scene, I realized it was missing from the start. This isn't something you see every day, folks. That's an actual plane landing on the highway. It seriously looks like a scene out of GTA. The pilot seriously deserves some recognition here for touching down safely with traffic on the road. You know, something is about to go wrong here. I mean, a helicopter with several cables just hanging around. I smell disaster. How could these guys not see this coming? Why would you try to fly a helicopter with so many things around? This was bound to happen. What a bizarre crash, though. It almost looked like a scene out of a Michael Bay movie. Here's another fail. Not for the pilots, though. This one is for the spotters. Phones, iPads, luggage, clothes, bodies. You can see everything just get blasted away into the water as the plane gears up to take off. Here's what happens when an air show goes wrong. In case you don't know, that jet is the mighty CF-18. It appears as if the pilot is trying to woo spectators with a low pass or something. But that quickly changes after he loses control of the jet as it stalls mid-air. The pilot is smart enough to eject just in time, right before the CF-18 hits the ground, resulting in a huge explosion. Well, that's one way to make an entrance. This video is about to get intense. If you're an aviation geek like me, you probably remember the tragic TransAsia 235 flight. It was one of the most devastating incidents in aviation history, and this animation you're watching right now shows just that. But wait till you see the actual footage. I swear this does not seem real. You can see the ATR-72 narrowly avoid the buildings before clipping the bridge and crashing straight into the water. And even though this is as bad as it gets, I'd like to remind you all that flying is still the safest way to travel. What's worse than a failed landing or takeoff? Knowing you're about to go through a sandstorm. You know how they say, taking off is optional, but landing's inevitable, folks. But yeah, I'd be freaking out if I was in this airplane because trust me, sandstorms can be brutal. And while the plane managed to make it out, it had micro tears all over the body, with the propeller literally about to fall off. The scary part about it is how the plane might run fine for the next couple of flights, But somewhere inside the engine, there's probably a tiny hairline crack that's going to blow up the engine someday. Nothing to see over here, people. Just a normal guy in his normal Cessna. And to be honest, he does a pretty good job at bringing her down, right before throwing it all away. I'm guessing he came down a bit too hard, which led to the plane skidding off the runway. But my dude here oversteers the life out of the plane as it heads straight for the hangar. You're going to want to look at the bottom right of your screen. Not at the aircraft taking off, but beside it. It's a little hard to see, but there's a helicopter and small plane both flying towards each other. And with all that advanced equipment, you'd expect they know this by now and are making adjustments to their course. But nope. Watch as there's a massive explosion in the sky after both machines crash into each other. I'm surprised how the helicopter did not see that plane, considering how it pretty much flew straight into it. I saved the craziest for the last, people. Behold, the C-17, an absolute unit made for dominating the skies. But flying this thing isn't a walk in the park. Considering how big and bulky it is, it takes years to understand the machine and finally get it right. And if you don't, this is what happens. The pilot loses control of his aircraft as it goes crashing down, followed by a massive cloud of smoke and fire. And while you watch the rest of the clip, let me quickly tell you what went wrong here. The pilot didn't hit the required speed to make those turns, and don't even get me started about the bank angle. The C-17 is not designed to be flown like that. This is usually what happens when the captain fails the ship and crew. So, what do you think? Were you blown away after seeing these takeoff failures? And have you ever witnessed an aviation fail? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more interesting videos in the future. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.